Okay. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Sunday podcast, where we decided to take the conversation deeper. This one, we've got a few extra screens and faces on for this episode. And so I'm joined, as always, by my friend Shareya. I am Devin. And then also joining us next to Shareya is Jamie. Jamie, how are you?
I'm good.
Great. And then next to me, actually, I don't know how this is going to edit, but whatever. Right. Yeah. Is Henry. Henry, how are you? Fantastic. Hey, before we dive into the conversation discussion, take a look at this video.
All right, guys, welcome back. So Henry, Jamie, we were wrapping up a series, the Epiphany season and this God with Us series. So Henry, what was the big idea? What main text were you in this week?
My main text was Second Peter chapter 2 or chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jamie, where was your main?
Mine was Matthew 17, 1 through 9.
And what was the big idea or the main?
For me, it was just really God speaking over him, listen to him, and just the difference of how when they were on the mountain, how God brought out with Moses and Elijah, and they started out, and then Moses and Elijah just kind of disappeared, and God, focused on Jesus, saying, "Listen to him," and how everything up until that moment was pointing to God, or pointing to Jesus, and pointing the way to him, and so just that kind of transitioning into that.
Yeah.
Henry, how did you get to Second Peter chapter 1?
Because that was part of the Revised Common Lectionary for this week.
Yes, and it stood out though, I imagine.
I think the bigger question is, I ended up in Second Peter chapter 1, but I actually didn't get to the verse that got me to Second Peter chapter 1 until toward the end. And I do believe I read Matthew chapter 17 as well, with the idea that I can't remember now, honestly. Did I?
Yes.
Okay. I don't remember. And I don't go and watch myself back. It's just too embarrassing. But anyways, the idea that was shaping in me is that when Peter gets all excited that they're on the Mount of Transfiguration, they're seeing all this happen, and God interrupts him and he says, "This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased." That isn't even the part that sticks out to me as much as that is baptism. And it's been the idea that we are beloved. And what does it look like to live into Jesus being the beloved, and because he is who he is, and that he didn't have to do anything. He hadn't made wine. He hadn't healed people. He hadn't raised people from the dead. He hadn't raised himself from the dead. He hadn't, done any of that stuff, and he was the beloved. And so my mind went with, and then the language of Second Peter chapter 1 is all beloved language without saying beloved. But Peter gets to that at the end of chapter 3. And so I'm glad you gave me a long runway, 4 weeks of prep, and we just let the Holy Spirit take everything that I was fixated on and make it happen. So there was one night where I literally couldn't get Second Peter out of my head all night into the morning. It was a very consuming evening for me. I never had that before, and I don't know if it's because I was sick. I don't know. It's just weird. But
if anybody hasn't seen Henry sick, it's a sight to behold. There's a lot of things that come forth. Some I would say maybe even divine, and then there are other things that are like left field. All right.
I did because I saw Henry sick and I didn't know he was sick, and I tried to give him a hug and he was like like this to me. Do you remember
Back
that?
distance.
social distancing.
Yeah.
Yikes.
One of the things that you called out, Jamie, I know that for me was has stuck because I what I loved about this series, even in the way that the lectionary kind of gave us the guide rails, is that we opened and closed this series with the same God speaking the same thing over the Son, right? So we open with his baptism. This is my dearly loved Son who brings me great joy. We close this series with God's voice on the mountain saying the same thing, but you called out that there's an addition to that of like, this is my dearly loved Son who brings me great joy. Listen to him. And the way I know, well, you can talk us through this if you want, but for me, the call out of like in this space, God's like, don't just listen to what has been, don't just listen to the echoes that have been before. And we've been having a lot of conversations, even at the district level, around monuments and movements, and the idea that actually, like the monuments, the things in our past where God's already spoken matter a lot. But they matter because those are the things that help us trust him for the movement and help us pay attention to what he looks like in the movement. And we can get stuck on like, this is where God has been, and this is what God looks like and what he's done already. And miss the fact that he's already moved and invited us into that. And that's what came to mind as you called out that like that little phrase that's added of like, listen to my Son because he's actually going to show you what this looks like now, was powerful for me.
Yeah, and I think for me that was the big one, especially as we're walking through this, what it looks like to be a Jesus-shaped church. Just looking at the like, uh, as we're walking into that, looking at like, God spoke to us and said, yes, I'm calling you by name. I'm speaking into your identity, and so these are the things that I'm speaking to you. It doesn't matter, who you are as a how big you are or think, how your identity sits as your popularity or whatever in your community. And so monuments, like I went back to like, where we were as a church prior to where we sit now. And so thinking into like, what did God speak into that moment, listening to where he is bringing us now, listening to God, just speaking into that identity, like that for me, that moment where he's changed those words, this is my Son and I love him and he brings me great joy, but listening to him and following his words, following his path instead of just looking back and saying, okay, yeah, that was a great moment, God spoke,
Move on.
moving on. We're listening to him, we're following him.
Yeah. It's a big echo.
Yeah, well, and also makes me think too of Henry with this beloved and the you had alluded to on Sunday is the book in which you were posed with this question. Can you share the question that you were posed with in this book?
I can, and I will. It is. By the way, I didn't share what the book was at the end, so
You
the
did
book
not.
is
There you go.
Beloved.
There's
you
the
go.
teaser.
Beloved.
People have to watch this
There
to
you
find
go.
out.
That's right.
There you go. There you go. Okay. If I could approach our holy God right now and ask him how he feels about me, what do I think he would say? And
It sounds like an echo of what Jamie, you were just talking about in identity. That question brought me to, and then what Henry you're talking about with this beloved. And you posed that question to me. Was it Sunday morning?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did.
yeah,
Up on the mountain.
yeah.
I was
Right,
giving you a little teaser.
Hmm.
right before we got on this call, like seconds before we got on this call, I was sharing with Jamie one of the things we did up at camp. So Devin and I spent this past weekend up at winter camp with 120 teenagers and leaders from across the district. And one of the things that we had the teenagers do, in a way to practice the prophetic, like practice hearing what God might be speaking over them. We gave them letterhead that was like, okay, if God were to write you a letter right now, what do you think he would want to say to you? And so that was a powerful exercise for a lot of teenagers, but for me, in that space, it felt like God was offering some things that I've been waiting a couple weeks for. And so even as you're saying, this is again such an echo of like, will we trust the Father to speak and to speak what we need to hear and when we need to hear it, and let that be the thing that shapes?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, just the identity that he speaks into us and the, um, even looking back over just this last week, just from Sunday till now, I was sharing with Shay when, we were talking about, okay, we're gonna film. I was like, gosh, I can't even remember what I talked about on Sunday because it's been
I told her we asked that
been
every
a week for me. It's just there's been a lot of things that have happened this week, and today has just been an overflow of blessings where I've just seen God just pour into my life today. And so it's just um, walking that out today and just seeing that, like, I closed part of my sermon on Sunday with just, you know, how is he, how do we walk this out? And understanding that we are living by, delighting in him and in his identity in us and how that makes us who we are. And so just um, knowing that if we listen to him and we follow him, that our identity speaks through that.
Well, and I think too, as you're saying that, Jamie, what comes to mind is like you're sitting right now in a day of an overflow of blessings and some answers that were what we've been praying for.
Mhm.
But you on Sunday, in the middle of the hard and the waiting and
Yeah.
the not knowing, you sat in a space calling out, this is my identity and this is your identity. And so even there's something about when we let the identity come directly from the Father, that even when the blessing hasn't shown up yet, and that's the idea of belovedness, like actually the biggest blessing is that God says I'm loved.
Yeah.
And actually like you standing in that space and calling that out in a message when you are in the middle of waiting for something that could be really bad and really hard, is a testament to like where your identity is rooted. And like even if the
Even if-
worst thing happens, this is who God is, and he says I'm loved. And that's powerful. That's a powerful testimony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it even draws me back to Second Peter 1, in which he talks about their witnesses of Jesus, they're witnesses of his life and his death and his resurrection, and in being a witness, an eyewitness even of his majesty, as it says in verse 16. Then it gets into Peter recounting and remembering what was said over Jesus at the uh, transfiguration, and that then draws us back to the baptism. So in all of these places, it's like more evidence, proof, or again, talking about eyewitnesses, recounting and accounting, being accountable of the person of Jesus, the divinity of Christ. What God has spoken over him, and also then too, we attribute that to what God desires to speak over us through his son Jesus. And those are like, um, uh, I don't know, what's the metaphor or the visual of like, if we're pleasure stacking, That's the pleasure stacking of the goodness of God. Reminders and recounting, again, as he talks about eyewitnesses, we call back to those stories of the goodness of God. Whether we're in a good week or we are having a hard week or it's full or we're anticipating something hard coming or we've just come out of something hard. What's the phrase? Like you're either coming out of a trial or you're going into one.
Mhm.
You're at one place or the other. And if you're not in one, one's coming. And if you just come out of one, catch your breath and another one's coming later.
Mhm.
But in some ways too, as we're talking about this idea of like stacking things or building up faith or pleasure stacking the goodness of God. And I like yes in all those things, but there's also there's also kind of a stripping away in the hard spaces that say like when the only thing that's left is actually like kind of nothing.
Hmm.
This is still true.
Mhm.
And that because sometimes and like I don't know, we've talked about this before, Devin, but sometimes as I do want to always call out the goodness of God, of which there is much. And actually, the more that we have practiced doing that, and we even did this, we just got done with our family gathering, and we went around the tables tonight and shared. Like it would have been enough, but and everybody shared, and there was some big, huge things of where like, oh my gosh, God moved so powerfully, and then there were some little things of like I got to have dinner with my dad at my grandparents' house, like all across the spectrum. And so I do want to always call out God's goodness. And when we do that, it reminds us of the places he's shown up before, and we can trust him for what comes.
Hmm.
But sometimes I actually think that it's okay to say in this moment, in this space, I don't see the goodness of God. I don't see it yet. Or this is a hard thing or whatever. And still, in this space, what's true is that God says, I am his beloved,
Mhm.
and he delights in me. Because people who do not yet know the Father, um, it's hard to see the goodness of God when you don't know the Father yet. But what we can offer is like, hey, I actually get it. I've been in spaces where I've struggled to see his goodness, and still this is what I know is true. And I had a conversation with a teenager at winter camp this weekend who was questioning a lot of these kind of things like, is God good? Is God real? Everybody around me thinks I'm a big joke. And in that moment, it was like, let me speak some truth into you, because the most true thing about who you are right now is that God is madly in love with you. And you actually don't have to believe that. It's okay if it doesn't feel like that's true, but it is true because of who God is and because of how he made you. And so in those spaces, like, the goodness I do want to call out, but I also want to recognize that in the spaces where it feels like there isn't and there's a stripping away, what's left is still the voice of God saying, you're my beloved,
Mhm.
who brings me great joy. And when there's nothing else, there's that.
Mhm. Because it's not based on anything that we can do or
Correct.
we have done.
Yeah.
It's who he created us to be. It's who he is.
And
Yeah.
that's the biggest blessing.
Yeah.
The presence of God and the fact that he'd speak to us
Yeah.
and call us his own is the blessing.
Yeah.
And everything else is icing on the cake.
Right. Exactly.
So as we wrap up here, we'll talk about Kairos. What's God saying? How are we going to respond? So Henry, what's that for you this week? Like what's still sticking that God's saying?
Um, for me, it's the thing that I've had conversations with since Sunday are it's the Greek word pleonazo. It's increasing or abound or superabound. And it's if we lean into what God has already provided, we didn't have to do anything for what he has given us. So if we lean into what he's given us, not out of things that we had to earn or do anything like that, that we actually bring honor to him, and that out of the outcome of that is not just to simply abound, but the word is superabound. It's if you think of abounding as a river flowing, Superabounding is, what does the river look like when it overfilled its banks? And like we get that visual here in the Pacific Northwest because we see that happen a lot. Oftentimes we look at rivers flooding over as catastrophe because we also build cities in floodplains, and it's not meant for that. It's actually some of the richest farmland that you can have. So when the river spills over in normal context, normal settings, it spills out into everything around it, and then the nutrients of the land are improved. The trees that are sitting there, the crops that are sitting there, have a significant potential to multiply whatever they're producing because something happened that made the river go beyond what it was supposed to go beyond. And that's what Peter's spending a significant amount of his time is in setting up. The idea that we're beloved is, you need to understand that because you're beloved, you have the same access Jesus had. We have the same access that Jesus had. And so when he starts off with, may grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who have called us into his own glory and excellence. Not some things, it's not an occasional thing, it's all things. And when we tap into all of those things, it's hard. I mean, the visual is, when you tap into all those things, you're overflowing the banks. It's beyond what we can contain within the banks. And so leaning into those things, or wanting to grow in our pursuit of who Jesus is. And I led with the idea that, like, we've had a lot of talk about the idea that we want to be a Jesus-shaped church, but we will never be a Jesus-shaped church until we are a Jesus-shaped people. And that is an individual thing, but it is also a communal thing.
Mhm.
Because as I spill over my banks, it's going to impact Devin, and as he spills over his banks, he's going to impact the people around him, and then the then we have a flood on our hands, and then it's all over the place in our community, and that's the reverberations of what that is. It's actually a positive impact. And so tapping into what he has already provided for us, tapping into the idea or the understanding that we already are his children, and that we can tap into the same power and the same resources as the one we follow, and that's Jesus. So
It's good.
Jamie, what about for you? It's still sticking.
I think for me, it's just being loved. I mean, just no matter what. Like it again, it just goes back to, like, there's nothing that I can do, can't do, didn't do, failed to do, did wrong. That's just God's grace and God's love, and um, you know, that even if it doesn't matter,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah,
And it's like simple and overwhelming at the same time.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's a good gun.
Devin, how about you?
Yeah, for me, I think it's Henry's question that he posed to me on Sunday from the book Beloved, and just sitting with that question. Some of what I reflect in that question, it's a simple question, but it's one that I've sensed, like, I don't stop long enough to ponder that one, and being in the presence of God, what would God say to me? What would be the look on his face towards me? And I think there's something really beautiful that I sense an invitation from God is to sit on that question and to ponder, not just the answer and offer words, but like the whole if I could picture myself in the presence of God, like all of that exists around, right? If I could visualize myself there and call attention to those different um, senses and emotions and things around and what I'm taking in is God takes me in, I guess is the so there's I think something in there of a really beautiful way of or invitation to ponder, to sit in that with God, and to let that flood over me, roll over me, fill me, and of I'm beloved by God, not because I've shown up with anything of worth, just me.
Yeah.
I haven't done anything to earn it. I just show up with me, and he says, "Beloved."
Yeah.
So, yeah,
For me, I think it's the second half of that phrase that gets echoed at the baptism and the on the mountain of like, yes, this is my dearly loved, but in whom I am pleased, or who brings me great joy, in whom I delight, which is an echo of even what God was offering me at camp in this space of like, hey, these things that are in you that maybe you've seen as defects or flaws actually might be something I put in you. It might be evidence of something of me in you, and it might be something that I actually put in you with intention. And so the idea of God looking like before Jesus does anything, not only does he say like the most true thing about you is I love you, but also I delight in you, speaks to like you're exactly the way I made you to be. And so that's an echo for me in some places that I was wrestling with and asking questions about that feels like God's reminding like um, in those places you look like me and I delight in that. So
yeah,
it's good.
those are good truths.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we thanks for joining us in this episode, and for those listening and watching, thank you for listening in. And we hope and pray that your conversations are going beyond Sunday. That as God stirs your hearts, that you've got others that you're having these conversations with, and discerning and praying through, and allowing God to speak and to speak His truth of who you are and who you are because of Him over you. And that encourages you, uplifts your spirit. And so again, until next episode, take care.